Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And today I would like to walk us through and get Cameron's commentary on an article that I ran across in Plough Magazine titled "Computers Can't Do Math," which sounds ridiculous. Yes, which sounds ridiculous. This is by, give credit where credit's due, David Scheingold is an architect and a philosopher and wrote this. And he said, the fact that computers can't do math is a shocking statement to most people. Most people don't think about it, but it is widely kicked around in philosophy departments and computer science departments and whatnot. And I think most people would balk at that. And so he would say, well, what's really going on is computers are phenomenal at simulating doing math, but they're not actually conceptualizing math. Now, that might sound super obvious to us, but it also is probably worked itself into your subconscious that computers and calculators do math and they don't, is the argument. Now, the reason that this is important is the angle that he's bringing to this is that this should give us a little bit of pause before we all lose our minds thinking that, the earth is going to end in ice fire or artificial intelligence taking over. He gives some, I think, rightfully optimistic thoughts on this. But let me give you a couple illustrations that he uses that are kind of fun, that kind of prove and show that computers aren't conceptualizing math, or your calculator isn't. And I actually tried this one out. If you go into the your favorite search engine and you type 15 nines, I don't know what that number is exactly, but that's a lot of nines, and then do minus, and then do 14 nines and an 8. What is 15 nines minus 14 nines and an 8? Almost immediately, if you see that written out. In fact, I tried this on like my kids and be like, hey, what's this subtraction problem? And showed them 15 nines minus 14 nines and an 8. And all within less than half a second said the answer to that is 1. It's immediately obvious to the human mind that the answer to that is 1. Google doesn't do it. In fact, I mean, when I just tried it in like Google Chrome just now, it couldn't figure out what was going on there. And so it's funny because that's not a number that anybody ever needs to type into Google to know the answer to. And so it's not programmed to be able to handle math of that size. And probably no other human has ever done that math problem, but it's immediately obvious to the human mind that the difference between those two numbers is 1. So that would be an example of you're not actually subtracting all of those numbers from each other when you look at that as a human. You just know. And it might have sounded more complicated when I said it out, but if you saw this in writing, you would immediately have said 1 if you finished kindergarten. And so it's just a funny example of like a math problem that you can conceptually do that the algorithm can't. Then there are some other funny systems where, like, if I were to try to convince you, Cameron, that there was a whole number somewhere in between 4 and 5, that there was an integer snuck in there, you'd be like, no, I'm pretty sure there's not a whole number in between that. Like, you can conceptualize 4 and 5 and the fact that there's not a whole number in there in between. But so like on the 32-bit float system that a lot of computational algorithms are based off of, it doesn't know the number 16,770,217. It doesn't think that number exists because it can't be replicated in the 32-bit float format. And so it does math incorrectly with any operation that uses that number. So you get these like weird little flaws where you would say, well, anything under that, first of all, we don't use that very much. I mean, not many of us are looking at 16,777,200 and something, on a day-to-day basis. So we think that computers are phenomenal at that. He said, it's kind of like saying that you had a friend in first grade who always aced every test on single digit addition. And they were perfect. They were the best student. And then you went out for ice cream or something and you said, okay, it's 80 cents and we'll split it. So you pay 40 and I'll pay 40. And they're like, oh no, 40 plus 40 is 100. And then you're recalculating all of a sudden because you're like, oh wait, this person isn't good at math. They're good at single digit math. And he's saying that's kind of, so they were simulating the concept of math, but really they had just memorized the early integers. So that's what he's saying is like computers are phenomenal at simulating calculating, but they're not really calculating. And we know that's true. But let me give you one more example, and then I'll wrap this up and get you to jump in here a little bit, or two more maybe. He was saying that think that you have a bag of marbles, for example, and you want to learn about doubling numbers. So you reach in and you pull out two marbles, and then you think, I wonder what 2 plus 2 is. And you reach in the bag and you pull out two more marbles, and now you have four. So you're like, okay, now I know that 2 plus 2 is 4. And then you reach into the bag to double 4 again, but you only find three marbles in there. So you say, oh, I can't double 4 because I only have three. But then you might, as a human, say, oh, but I have this pen in my pocket. So I'll put the pen down as a marble, as a placeholder for the fourth marble so that I can do my math problem. So you can, by proxy, place things as counters for other things that aren't marbles in that. And that's because you can conceptually think through placeholders and what should get counted and what can't, and a computer can't do it. Um, and so for 99.9999% of the stuff that we do, the computer's inability to do that doesn't really matter, but there are flaws in the system that it generates. And so one that he uses that's funny is that in, I think it was Chat GPT 3 or Chat GPT 3.5, there was a specific, can't even remember what the name, it was some Pokemon. Oh, I got it right here. Solid Gold Magikarp, which I know nothing about Pokemon, but I asked my kids, like, hey, do you know what this is? And like, sure. And Chat GPT 3 didn't know what it was and associated that word with the word distribute. Now, this has been fixed in updated versions of this, but because it wasn't programmed, it couldn't figure out what that thing was and totally melted down and didn't work. So it was something silly like a Pokemon that stumped it. And then he also refers to a test that was done where the Marines, or maybe it's just the military army, I don't know which group, was using AI to render security camera footage for like people trying to sneak past a camera. And then they found out that if they just put a cardboard box over their head and walked past it, the AI couldn't figure out that there was somebody walking through the scene. So if they were trying to like wear camo and sneak through, sure, but just put a big old cardboard box on your head and you can walk right past the camera, because it couldn't conceptualize what it was actually trying to do. And so his overall argument is that we will beat AI because of the weirdness of our minds, that they aren't conscientiously thinking, which we all know, but that it will be faster at calculating than us, but it'll never be able to outwit it. And I'll read you the last two sentences of the article, which I think summarize his whole argument. As he said, the human mind is magic, or might as well be. And it is by this magic that we can defeat AI, not by outwitting it or by unplugging it or any such thing, but by the sheer weirdness of the human mind. And I think that's just a really helpful little check. I know we've talked about AI before, and it's sure it's a catchy kind of title for him to use for his article, that AI computers can't do math, but it is true. And we need to just catch our breath here for a minute and recognize that the sheer complexity of the fact that my children can do some things that AI can't do based off of them being human and their conceptual capacity. Sure, they can't calculate stuff, and count things at the speed of other systems, but yeah, just a little glimmer of hope there to remind you that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and your mind is weird beyond anything that can be digitally replicated at this point. So, how's that argument strike you, Cameron?
Well, computers don't think at all, and you mentioned, these things aren't, there's no conscientious process going on. We all know that. Well, I don't think we all do know that. I think our metaphors have misled us a little bit. We talk about computers thinking, we talk about memory in computers, and we're forgetting that these are at best, they really are, they're metaphors. They're ways of trying to picture what's going on conceptually. But yes, so a computer, you've pointed out some of those limitations with a little exercise, with the math exercise, and the cardboard box example is really funny.
I think
but
so.
They operate under the constraints of their programming. So the intelligence, the mind involved in all of this, really minds belong to the human beings, the persons behind all of this sophisticated technology. So I think we wouldn't have so much of a problem if we didn't keep making this basic but very profound category mistake. I think even the word intelligence, when it in the artificial intelligence phrase, is highly misleading. It's not intelligence in any kind of human conception of that word. When he says the human mind is magic, or may as well be, anybody who's honest about consciousness will readily admit the same thing. And there are plenty of, by the way, there are plenty of non-Christians who basically have admitted and said as much. One of them, a famous example I can give, is Thomas Nagel, who wrote his book Mind and Cosmos, which effectively made him a lot of enemies in, among academic atheists, because he is himself not a Christian, but he doesn't want to believe in God, but he admits that consciousness is something that simply is a mystery. The word he uses is mystery. It cannot be explained away, and any neo-Darwinian model won't work. But he's also very clear that he doesn't want to believe in God at all, and he says, I have good reasons for not wanting to believe in God. I have a cosmic authority problem. So he's very honest about that. So he goes in the direction of panpsychism, thinking that in some way mind is part of everything. Now, why am I bringing all that in? I'm bringing that in because consciousness is a miracle. It is a mystery. It is a miracle, and it is a gift from God. And we routinely take our minds for granted nowadays, because without realizing it, a highly reductive model has crept into a lot of our thinking. And because of that, we tend to underestimate the beauty and the splendor of the mind. So I think that's something that's going on here behind the scenes a little bit.
When you think of kind of famous works of art, or if you think of, if you're a sculptor or a painter, one of the pinnacles of your expression, as in your greatness, is to be able to replicate the human body, right? So that's why you have David is a famous
Right.
sculpture, and you
David.
have, like, because a lot of people are like, what's the deal with artists painting nude people? It's because there's this whole philosophy and history of being able to capture the human form as being kind of you've reached the top whenever you're able to do that well, because the human is seen to be such a splendid creature.
The pinnacle of creation.
The pinnacle of
Yes.
creation. So there's an old, I think, philosophical background to that too, but then there's an artistic. It is hard to draw a human well. But then, so there's almost like the computer science version of that, I think, Cameron, of we've reached the top whenever we can mirror consciousness. So there's like almost an artistic philosophical desire to say, we're no longer trying to sculpt the perfect body, but can we program the perfect mind or consciousness? So I think there's a little bit of a quasi-religious, mystical, philosophical game afoot here. And let's be honest, a lot of the AI stuff is really, really impressive at simulating conscientiousness.
It is.
It mirrors that.
That's really a shrewd example. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not poo-pooing the idea here. I think it'll be a part of our life forever. But I remember when graphing calculators were like really becoming a thing. So showing my age here a little bit. I lived before graphing calculators could do differential equations back in my day. And they were solar powered. But I remember having a math class. I forget what course it was, and we were doing a whole bunch of really quick calculations. And the guy beside me did some number times zero, or divided by zero, or something. Like, it was very obvious that I forget what it was. Anyway, he typed in his calculator, and the teacher saw it, and she went ballistic on this kid. She's like, no, stop right there. Like, you obviously know in your mind conceptually that he must have multiplied by zero on the calculator. And she was kind of taking him to task because conceptually we all know that the number is going to be zero, but he started second guessing his calculations because he'd become so dependent on the calculator that he multiplied something by zero in his calculator.
Yeah.
And I think that's like there's a little bit of an analogy for me in here on how dependent we become on something else doing our thinking for us. That is a reminder to me of how do we continue to honor the conceptual capacity of humanity in light of things that mimic and mirror this well. There's some things like if you catch yourself relying on this program to multiply by zero for you, you might be missing something in life. I don't know why that example popped into my mind, but
you're making me think of that. Well, it's a trick. You're making me think of that episode of The Office where the GPS is leading Michael Scott directly into a lake. And the guy who's sitting, Dwight Schrute, who's in the front of the car with him, Michael, stop the car. No, the GPS says to go this way. No, obviously you can't go. And he drives the car right into the water.
Yeah. So anyway.
We do become awfully, I want to go back to your example because of the ambition to create a human mind, so to speak. That's a very good example. In a sense, Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus looks at that idea of human beings trying to play God and to try, in that case, Victor Frankenstein trying to, quote, create life. Now, he can't create it from ex nihilo, from nothing. He's got to harvest cadavers, which is why it's a pretty gruesome story. But when you think of an example of the marvels of the mind, you were talking about a sculpture like David, where you see, the human body recreate, sort of a perfect imitation of the human body, commemorating it as the pinnacle of creation. Well, another way to look at that would be a splendid piece of writing. Let's take one of the great poems, Dante's Divine Comedy. So you can look at that as a supreme poetic achievement. But on the other hand, neuroscientists and people along those lines have also been very interested in what these great works of literature say about the human mind, because they're displays of the marvelous complexity and sophistication that we're capable of when we commit some of the contents of our consciousness to paper, right? So with regard to AI, a recent example, and I wrote about this on our TOL blog, actually, but a recent example that I came across was a novelist. His name's escaping me right now, but he's a big fan of using some of the more sophisticated AI, writing software or chat GPTs to finish unfinished novels. So Jane Austen left behind. A lot of novelists have unfinished, Jane Austen, Fyodor Dostoevsky had notes on a final novel himself. I mean, a lot of people would love to have, of course, seen those eventual works.
Well, Flannery O'Connor was one I think you had used. Yeah,
and Flannery O'Connor, because the antidote to this approach, so this gentleman was saying, yes, use it. I want to see these. I want to know what happens at the end of this Jane Austen story, for instance. I want to know what happens. And functionally, this thing will do a pretty good job of simulating the language that Jane Austen used, or whoever it is I want to read. And I will be able to just get that ending that I want. So it's very much it's a very pragmatic, functional argument. So Jessica Houghton Wilson kind of gave a different answer that I thought was very powerful. And it goes along the lines of the weirdness of the human mind. But she spent 14 years working with the manuscript to Flannery O'Connor's final novel, which was unfinished. And so she at one point experimented with finishing it herself. At one point, she even looked at what the chat GPT unit would do with it. But in the end, what she opted to do was she offered what she called a literary excavation. She showed you bits of that novel in progress. She wrote about it a little bit, but allowed this to be a fragment as it was. So she honored Flannery O'Connor as the person, because Flannery O'Connor didn't finish it, so she didn't finish it, let you see the novel in progress, and offered commentary on what was going on and how this novel was coming together. And that was a much more human way to honor the person. The other way, just let this software program finish it, is that betrays a very mechanistic mindset, where in a sense the author themselves are completely expendable. All you
Okay.
really care about is some sort of a finished product. Yes.
But okay, all right, let me make some counter arguments here to what I was saying earlier. Or maybe not. Maybe this fleshes it out. So I was looking this up for something else that I was doing. Most watched video on YouTube. You want to take a guess?
Hmm.
Baby
I
Shark
have no
Dance.
idea.
Okay, so Baby Shark Dance, most watched video
Oh
on YouTube.
boy. Yep.
Most watched movie last year,
Well, the
Barbie.
future of humanity is safe, I have to say.
Well, okay, but this is the point I'm making. So most watched movie is Barbie. Most watched YouTube video is Baby Shark. The most printed and like physical read book was it's a romance novel, like The End of Us or something. All of which, and this is me being critical, I would say are not highbrow cultural analysis or commentary. Entertainment.
How dare you?
I know you love Barbie, Cameron, but I'm saying AI will be able to simulate all of that type of stuff and do it well and to the point that humans will love it if you're just seeking entertainment. So our capacity to not know when to stop and our capacity to want to see the completion of things and our capacity and our desire for there to be story and meaning, and this fits with the Flannery O'Connor example, only a human would stop and say, and we're going to honor the person by not completing this. But a lot of humans would say, no, everything all together all at once, we got to have it. And so the other phenomenal capacity that we have as humans is the ability to see what we're looking for us to want something to be in a certain way and then see that thing, even if it's not there, and to fill in the gaps and to connect details. And AI will continuously give us what we want. Like, talking about like having like say 15 different endings to a film, for example. How did you want that movie to end? Okay, here it is. So there's like a dehumanizing. All right, here's the question. Can we outrun ourselves to the point that we dehumanize ourselves in the process? Is the question. Because I was thinking, like I saw a headline in NPR. If our relationships with robots aren't real, but they're meaningful, do we really care that they're not real? I mean, that's a human asking that question.
It is. We have so dehumanized ourselves already, I think. And this is where Christians can really shine, because part of what we want to do is restore to people a full vision of what personhood really is. And we do that by turning to Christ, our primary exemplar and our Lord and Savior. So going back to the Flannery O'Connor example, we can say, so on the one hand, you can make a purely functional argument, which says, I want the ending to the novel. Therefore, this thing can do it, so I'm going to do it. Why not? Well, why not only if human beings aren't really all that special? Now, the guy who said that, by the way, this novelist, I can't remember his name. He's a contemporary novelist. He doesn't believe human beings are special. And so it's perfectly consistent for him to voice that expectation. And it's what I thought made his perspective more interesting is he's not just some, Joe Schmo consuming Harlequin romance novels. Not that there's anything wrong with, but he is himself an accomplished novelist who writes, by the way, literary style novels. So kind of hoity-toity novels with big words in them. He went to Ivy League schools, and he's still saying, I want the ending. I want to know why, why do the heathen rage? That's the Flannery O'Connor final novel that wasn't finished. I want to know how it ends, so I'm just going to have this machine finish it for me, and I'm going to enjoy it. So if humans aren't special, there's no problem with that perspective. But if we're made in the image of God, then that to do something like that would be to profoundly dishonor Flannery O'Connor. Not only her work, but her as a person. And that would be a very unneighborly thing to do. And so that's why what Jessica Hooten Wilson is doing is she's behaving like a good Christian scholar here, and she's showing you an alternative. And in this alternative, no, you don't get completely what you want. But maybe if you're thinking more along Christian lines, what you want changes. And because Your ChatGPT is not going to give you what you want either, by the way. Let's just be perfectly honest. Here's where a little garden variety philosophy will help you out. You can get an ending to the novel, but it is not Flannery O'Connor. You want Flannery O'Connor to finish her novel? You can't. She won't. She's gone. She's not here to do that. ChatGPT is not Flannery O'Connor. So what you're getting is not Flannery O'Connor. You're getting an illusion. And that is an important question. And science fiction authors have been asking that for a while. Yeah.
But I'm saying that one of the features of humans is we often find ourselves wanting the illusion. So,
absolutely. We do. That's true. Yeah.
Let me try this.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you entirely.
To wrap this all up here. So I have a friend who has an apple tree nursery, and he has 75 varieties of different kinds of apples that he's cultivated over years and found and discovered, and it's phenomenal variety and diversity. And oftentimes he'll say, somebody will stop in and will say, I would like to buy a Red Delicious apple tree. And he will say to them, like, no, you don't. You want a Red Delicious apple because that's what the school lunch lady put on your plate, and that's what you think of as an apple. But compared to all the other apples out there, the Red Delicious is mealy, is not flavorful, and it was designed for the purpose of being coated and waxed and able to ship across the country in the middle of the winter. It's the lowest common denominator of what a good apple is. But if you've never eaten another kind of apple, you think, I like apples, therefore I like the Red Delicious apple. Sorry to those few of you out there who like Red Delicious apples. And so people want it because it's all that they've ever seen. And what I'm suggesting here is the travesty would be that AI is going to be able to mimic human conscientiousness only at the most basic level. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as Christians to embrace and explore the diversity and the grandeur and the splendor of what it means to be made in the image of God, and to live in the fullness of that is going to be radically diverse and exhibit in our lives capacities that can't be digitally replicated. If you do want the illusion and you're not aspiring to anything in life and you just need to be entertained from here on out, AI will through the market figure out a way to develop what it is that you want, and you can sit there and be happy. But for most of us, we don't, I guess what Cameron's saying is, don't fall into the trap of being too easily pleased here. Don't give up on reality and fall for the illusion. And so, as long as we're fixing our minds on things above, it's going to be a long, long time before anything digital can replicate the phenomenal creativity. Also, conscientiousness from a Imago Dei perspective is always embodied. In fact, it's creepy when you have a conscientiousness that isn't embodied. That's why you see trying to match AI with robots. But we are a long way off from being able to do that. So I think my takeaway here, Cameron, is to continue to explore and discover and worship the Lord and love life and push into the features of things that can't be digitally replicated, and teach those around me too to be able to laugh at the fearful and wonderful way in which the human mind is constructed. We don't have to use the word that it's magic, but it has that essence to it almost, just because it's been created in such a way that is so unpredictable by other humans and even by our algorithms. So I don't know that this podcast was really necessary to ease your fears, but if you had any of those, I don't lose sleep over this one at night just yet. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.